Chaos, betrayal, and a shifting landscape. It has been a wild weekend in Russia. On Saturday, Yevgeny Prigozhin, the former chief of the Wagner mercenary group, called off the mutiny he initiated just a day earlier after his soldiers were already making their way to the Russian capital, Moscow. In an emergency televised address, Russian President Vladimir Putin had called the armed mutiny as treason. Russia's National Anti-Terrorist Committee has opened a criminal case against Prigozhin, accusing him of calling for an armed rebellion. But the case was dropped after a deal was brokered by Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko. At the moment, Prigozhin's location is not known. What impact will the day of chaos have on Russia and the ongoing war in Ukraine? I'm pleased to be joined here in the Beijing studio by Teng Jianqun, Director of the Diplomatic Studies Center at Hunan Normal University, and from Shanghai by Josef Mahoney, Professor of Politics and International Relations at East China Normal University. Gentlemen, welcome. So on Saturday, as we say, the Wagner Group claimed control of all military bases in southern Russian city of Rostov-on-Don and another city about 500 kilometers away from Moscow before he agreed to de-escalate. So looking back, how would you, Professor Teng, how would you call the incident, the saga? What has changed and what has not?
This is actually a big event for the Russian government, especially the mercenary group. Just would like to have some bargaining with the central government and with the Ministry of Foreign Defense. So I think this event will give some impact on the special operation in Ukraine, but I don't think it will fundamentally change the landscape of the political life in Kremlin or in Moscow or in the battlefield in Ukraine.
Professor Mahoney, what is your take? What has changed, what has not, and what will be the fate of Prigozhin?
Well, I think the mutiny, in so much as the reporting that we have about it is reliable, it's not surprising. The firm was not supposed to be operating in Russia, and by some accounts, it's illegal under Russian law. Nevertheless, the situation in Ukraine appears to have created these exceptional circumstances, which are not that exceptional compared with mercenaries used by other states in recent conflicts. And Wagner grew in size and capabilities while also directly challenging the Russian military leadership with whom they competed for resources, recruits, strategy, and power. Now, I'm inclined to view the mutiny as an unsurprising and largely well-managed reckoning with a force that had reached a tipping point in terms of its cost and benefits. That the mutiny came when Wagner was already in decline, while Russia was in the midst of confronting the Ukrainian counteroffensive, is not surprising. I think it signals Wagner's desperate opportunism. But ultimately, the mutiny failed and was aborted, with Wagner forces either joining the army or leaving Russia. Now, I would suggest this demonstrates not the weakness of the Russian state, as some have argued, but another example of resiliency while managing many other difficult challenges.
Yeah, as you mentioned, Professor Mahoney, some analysts and some media have said that Russian President Vladimir Putin will be weakened by the episode, that the next, accounting from when the incident started, that the next 2 days will be a moment of call for the fate of the Russian president. Former U.S. ambassador to Russia, Michael McCall, told NBC that the Russian leader is much weaker today than before the incident. Professor Teng, do you agree? And what may be the changes, even challenges, President Putin must face now?
I'm not 100% in favor of such an argument that the Putin government has become weaker and weaker at this moment. I think to some extent, Putin government will learn some lessons from the incident and will enhance its political control and military control in the country. So that might be a good chance for President Putin to go in further to consolidate his power, especially the central power in Moscow, and also change some leaders for the special operation in Ukraine. This might be a good opportunity for Putin to reorganize the military and also to reorganize the political power in Moscow.
But some people would argue that the Wagner Group had been instrumental in capturing some of the key strategic places. I mean, either this group in particular or the mechanism of using mercenaries, which is rather a common practice in the Russian, war practices. Professor Teng, in terms of that, what kind of challenges will this incident have on the future war-fighting capability of Russia?
Of course, this is really a strange arrangement to have some mercenary group in the operation and in the armed forces. Actually, Wagner Group has been the second hand of the Russian military, for example, to promote the national interest in Middle East and in Africa. This is actually most important part for Putin government to enhance or to promote its national interest in some areas in the world. So I think Wagner Group has already finished its job in Ukraine, but it will continue to play a very important role in such a promotion of national interest of Russia.
You mean there will be another mercenary group or the remaining soldiers of the group? Professor Teng, very briefly.
Yeah. I think the Wagner group will be there and some other mercenary groups will be there.
All right. Professor Mahoney, what's your take?
Well, I think the best analysis on this comes from Ukraine, which has described this disappointingly as the most ridiculous mutiny ever. I think many Ukrainians and their supporters were optimistic this would be a game changer and have hoped for some time that this would be the case well before it happened. I think many saw this reckoning coming sooner or later. The fact that it's fizzled so completely and deflated Kiev's optimisms suggests that it will have little impact on the conflict in ways that will benefit Ukraine. Contrarily, I think it may now strengthen Russia's state position as it reconsolidates its forces. I agree with my colleague in Beijing in what is likely to be the final or near final act of this conflict. In other words, once this counter-offensive has run its course and people have accepted finding a negotiated solution is the only way forward.
From the speed, how things developed, and the ridiculous ways, to borrow some of people's words, how it ended, what can we learn about the level, Professor Teng, the level of unity and stability or resilience in Russia? How ready and capable is Russia, or is the Putin administration in dealing with such crises? But on the other hand, could it also be there was a ridiculous thing that was started in the first place, so it doesn't say much?
Yeah, it was a very dangerous moment for Putin and for the Russian government, especially after Prigozhin just announced that he would like to, march on toward Moscow. That
from
might
hundreds of kilometers away.
And also with such a heavily armed forces for the country. So I think after the ending of this event, I'm sure Putin will continue his policy toward Ukraine and toward the reorganization of his power in Moscow. So this is might be a good opportunity for Putin to go ahead to be the central leader of the country.
Professor Mahoney, your take on that, and also on the reactions from the ordinary people we're seeing on pictures and videos. They seem to be very calm and not at all aroused or excited or terrorized by the potential consequence. We saw life going on as much as usual, as people can in these places. How so? Why is that?
Well, I think we also saw a lot of people, a lot of Russians coming out and supporting and praising the Wagner forces. I think many people in Russia are aware that Wagner has played an instrumental role in the conflict, and they're appreciative of that. But at the same time, the conflict or the mutiny was not working. I think this was the main point that was articulated in the call with Lukashenko, that Wagner hoped that this would spark a broader uprising that would perhaps lead to a coup. That clearly wasn't going to happen. And Wagner doesn't have its own air support, so it was going to run out of gas and abilities. But go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, I really have to wrap up there, but from China's perspective, China has been quite cautious and obviously wanted to wait and see how the situation unfolds before making any statement. China in the end said this is Russia's internal affair. We are not going to do much or say much. As Russia's friendly neighbor and comprehensive strategic partner of coordination for the new era, China supports Russia in maintaining national stability and achieving development and prosperity. Professor Teng, 20 seconds really, you can. What sets China apart from the excitement that we're seeing among some Western countries?
Of course, a stable neighbor should be a very important part for China for its domestic development and for the cooperation with other countries. So we should address the importance of the stability in any country close to China.
We have to leave it there. Many thanks to Professor Teng Jianqun, Director of the Diplomatic Studies Center of Hunan Normal University, and Josef Mahoney from East China Normal University. With that, we come to the end of this edition of The Point with me, Liu Xin. Thanks for joining us.